Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pi Ladies Con. I'm excited for this next session. We have our second keynote speaker, Susan Xu Chang, who is a principal data scientist at Elastic with previous ML experience in fintech, telecommunications, and social platforms. She writes about machine learning career growth in her newsletter in Substack and is also an author of the Machine Learning Interviews, which is published by O'Reilly. On weekends, she leads a team of game developers under Quill Game Studios with multiple games released on consoles and Steam. Today, Susan will talk to us about how game development in Python kickstarted her software and machine learning career. Over to you, Susan.
All right. Thank you so much, Marietta, for the introduction. Today, I'm going to be talking about how game development in Python kickstarted my software and machine learning career. First of all, it's really exciting to be here. I'm very glad I'm having a chance to speak at PyLadiesCon 2024 and really happy that you all are here. So as Marietta mentioned, I'm at Elastic. We make Elasticsearch. I've been in a few industries, such as telecom and fintech. And I've also spoken at a few PyCons, including US, India, Canada, Taiwan, APAC, and also in Germany, PyCon DE and PyData Berlin. And I make games at Quill Game Studios. And I've also wrote the book, Machine Learning Interviews, published by O'Reilly, which is aimed to help people enter the machine learning field. So feel free to check it out. This talk is about game development and how it did kickstart my career in Python, but it also is going to include some of the industries I've been in and how I've used Python in each of them, because the story didn't kind of end where I learned Python and used it for game development. So I'm going to try to cover a little bit of each one, but we'll be starting with the game development portion. So how did this all start? I would say there's some inspiration that came about when I was in elementary school. My first exposure to games was in class, which taught word and photo editing, but actually the computers had this game called Age of Empires, and I think this was in the it's a pretty old game. And I didn't really learn programming at the time, but I remember getting really into this game. And later on, I didn't really have any exposure to programming or games in the middle of my life, but I went on to study economics in school. So how did I get back into games and game development? This is the game that I made called A Summer with the Shiba Inu, and I made it with the open source Python engine called RenPy, and I'll be touching more about that. The story is about dogs it's like a sci-fi battle royale game set in K9, this fictional universe. And this game is on consoles like Nintendo Switch and whatnot. So back to the origin, in undergrad, I kind of rediscovered gaming, and I was playing these games like Team Fortress 2, Bastion, the original Overwatch, as well as Life is Strange. And, oops. Okay, so one kind of game that really attracted my attention was narrative-focused games where there's a lot of story that is woven into the game. And for people who are not necessarily exposed to this kind of game, just think about, let's say on Netflix, there was this series called Black Mirror Bandersnatch, where you could Bandersnatch, which you could choose different ways to react to the movie, and it would show different endings depending on how you chose. So this is one of the kind of interactiveness that is very commonly done in video games. So some games like classics that were on Nintendo DS, forgot which DS, but like 999 and recently Persona series, which has millions of copies sold. This is also pretty common. So they'll have a kind of narrative style that has this dialogue, and it's very story heavy. So for example, for another example, Pokemon games are also using this kind of text delivery to discuss and share their story. So I wanted to start making games like this because I was really into this kind of game. And actually, it's really difficult to build a custom engine as a solo developer. A lot of the big companies are using custom engines. So they'll have in-house staff and then they'll be building their own engines. Like I looked up Persona 5 and I think they have an in-house engine. But it's very costly as a solo developer because you're just one person or you're a very small team. So I stumbled upon RenPy, which is open sourced and it's pretty robust. People use it to make games such as game jam games, which game jams are kind of like hackathons, but for games. So you would do something over a weekend or over a month. And people would use RenPy to make games in that kind of situation, but also very high budget productions could also be using um, RenPy as well. So it is open source, and I really like the games that are made in RenPy, and myself having used it for a long time. The creator, Python's philosophy is that he wanted to make the best way to make visual novels and give it away for free. And of course, it's like there's a very robust community of contributors as well. It's also built on top of Pygame, which is a set of Python modules, which is designed for writing video games. I do want to add that it's focused more on 2D aspects, and the 3D aspects are often, if you want to build something heavy in 3D, you might want to consider other types of engines instead of Pygame and RenPy. But for my case, this perfectly fit my situation. So self-learning this kind of engine, as well as Python, helped me enter game development, even though I didn't have any background. So there's a lot of really good documentation as well as online Q&A that I could find even as a self-learner, and the kind of object-oriented programming paradigm, which is pretty common in game dev as well, like professionally, was also something that was really useful for me to learn. So here are some examples of what you can do with RenPy. Doki Doki Literature Club is a pretty popular game. I think there's been millions of downloads and streams. People might have heard of it. And recently they had a sequel that was released on, I believe, consoles and Steam at least. And they have these kind of like glitch effects or kind of making use of the OS environment. Like that code is done in RenPy. You can make transitions. Like this is just like a very simple example, but you can make transitions. You can animate things in and out of the screen as well with just like really simple code. This is like an older game and it's like a very heavy stats simulator game. So you want to increase the stats or the abilities of your character so that she can survive different situations. Like you're raising this princess and then she's going to be assassinated, or she could try to survive the assassination, like poison, or trying to woo over other countries, or so on and so forth. So it's actually using a very complex statistics engine or game stats engine underneath, and that was programmed with RenPy as well. I talked a bit about this topic at PyCon US, and Marietta, who is one of the organizers and the person who introduced me, mentioned that she introduced it to her kids and they learned to make a game with it, as well as Carol, who I think has also, I've seen her in this conference as well, who mentioned that her daughter got started with Python using RenPy in the past. So I'm very glad to have exposed RenPy to more people, and I hope that you might be interested in using it. Here are some more things that I could do with RenPy. So I think knowing Python, you might recognize the code here. So you might have some, standard library stuff like random, or you could have these classes and you could create these classes to do what you want. And it's going to be in very familiar syntax. As well as another example here, which is what I used to, to create a random generator for different messages. So let's say I don't want the character to only say, oh, interesting, interesting, interesting. I want them to sometimes say interesting or whoa or wonderful. Then you can just do something simple like this, right? It might look very familiar to you. A list, and then you select something with random, and you can see the syntax is very familiar here. So combining that in this game would be something like, let's say the player took 2.12 seconds to do something, then it would react to how long the player took. So let's say it's over 10 seconds, then you could have the in-game character say something else, like make fun of the player for being slow or something. But this is all done in very familiar Python syntax, as you could see. So I think with this engine, you know, your imagination's the limit as long as you're okay with the 2D focused aspect. There is also some 3D tools, but I guess like I don't have the time to talk about them in this talk, but you know, you can think about it, take a look and see if there's anyone you know, or if you yourself are interested in making games. All right, so just to recap here, I self-learned Python to make video games initially. I was doing this while I was studying and when I was working, but it turned out to be pretty good. I've sold over 12,000 copies as of a few years ago, and I haven't really updated this stat. But it is also out on Steam, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox. I forgot if we're on the new gen ones. I actually have to look. But it also helped me demonstrate actually that my Python skills were good enough to then enter, I guess, a professional field which uses Python. So this is what I did for game development, RenPy, as well as some standard library stuff. I'm making a game more called Autumn with the Shiba Inu. It's going a bit slow because I've been focusing a lot on my full-time work, which I'll be touching on a little bit after this. But I'm still working on it, so feel free to check it out on Steam. So that's the journey, which I'm still working on. I'm still kind of climbing this mountain, but it's been pretty fun. I'm going to go a little bit into the second field. So the intent is to share a bit like where Python, how I started with Python and where it's taken me, because it's actually taken me a lot of different places. So in my master's degree, I was self-learning Python a bit on the side, as again, after self-learning it for game development. So I was learning these things for more like statistics or data processing or modeling libraries like NumPy or Pandas, TensorFlow. So if you're working in the data sphere, you might be familiar with these. But after I got the basic familiarity from game development, I then self-learned these as well. So I landed a job in telecom, and what they might do, some things I'll just explain a little bit of background. So in telecommunications, you might work with some pretty interesting things that actually people, it's really out of sight, out of mind for people. So if you've seen these green boxes in your neighborhood, they actually hold the internet cables that actually then route into your house. So I was able to kind of go on a shadowing session with some technicians, look into these boxes. Like this is a photo that I took, as well as ride around in these trucks that drive you to people's homes that then install your internet. So if you ever wonder how that comes along, like they have these things. So some of the data and machine learning problems that I was using Python to, or I was exposed to, like I didn't work on all these teams, but we had at least some of these teams in each organization. So one problem that the telcos have is fleet availability. So such as they have limited amount of technicians and cars, and we have all these people to install internet at one day. So how do you optimize your routes or predict downtimes? So that's actually a similar problem to, let's say, companies like Uber, but on a little bit of a different scale, right? But you can think of it as like a routing or a scheduling problem. They also maintain mobile sites and websites. So this is going to be kind of similar to any other like retail site, shopping site, where we might allow people to pay their bills on it or purchase their new phones, as well as check their usage. So these are all things that they want to do. And these are all problems we have to solve with technology and telcos, even though it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. They also have over-the-top streaming. So for example, like this streaming service called Crave, which is a Canadian streaming service, because of licensing issues, I think only Crave has the right to legally broadcast like HBO content, for example. So this is kind of a similar problem to recommender systems, which is, for example, when you sign into YouTube or Spotify or Netflix, they'll recommend you the things that they think you'll like or they think that you'll engage in. So telecoms also have this use case, and they need people who are skilled in these things, in, I guess, more the data sphere, machine learning sphere, Python, to help them solve that. So I worked on some of these teams, some of these projects, not all of them, but those are the things that our company was dealing with at the time when I was there. So some of the interesting, useful Python stuff that I was using was, for example, scikit-learn or Spark and the Python wrapper, the machine learning library wrapper, as well as Jupyter. So just to, it's more like I wanted to explain a bit where Python has taken me and what tools we use, what are some of the problems. But yeah, I know it's a bit different from game development, but this is where it took me. So it is my journey. And I also learned some things actually back there at my first job, which was some of these other software things like version control, Docker and containerization, talking to people, as well as writing tests. So I think it's kind of a big living ecosystem, which involves other people. And it's not just Python per se, but that's what got me here. Another place I worked at is in fintech. So fintech might have problems to solve, like financial forecasting, fraud detections, or risk. I worked at a kind of more like a B2B fintech company. So there were some things we needed to deal with, such as reacting faster to seasonal events like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, or various world events, or weather situations. Like those are things we want to be able to react to as an external factor. Prevent fraudulent B2B transactions was also something we had to deal with, as well as reduce the risk of default and reduce financial losses. So things are useful that I learned there was more on the deployment side. So how machine learning can package in a microservice framework, because that's how we structured everything. There were just like other web services, there was like the machine learning services, and everything was a microservice. So there were some things that I used here. So about like time series predictions or anomaly detection. So there are some of these libraries in Python, like stats models, Prophet, etc. We also had to productionalize everything. So everything had to be able to be served on demand. So I learned to use tools like Kubeflow or MLflow, as well as wrapping this up in a microservice. You might need to use web apps like Sanic or Fast API, and of course like Flask and Django, though we use mostly the former. So just to summarize, like this is also somewhere else that Python has taken me. I wanted to share that to make maybe you're in this field. Maybe you're thinking, oh, maybe what are some useful things I could try out? Maybe this can help share and give some inspiration. Now I'm actually in Elasticsearch, but we're actually in the sub-organization in the security field, which is the kind of like cybersecurity, but we also call it security because it overlaps with a lot of different things in security, not just the cyber aspect. But this is because people will ingest a lot of logs and a lot of data into Elasticsearch because it's so fast to access and search over. So we tend to run machine learning models on top of those logs, if that makes sense, because they use Elasticsearch basically as a data store, and machine learning models can run on that data, which is in a data store. So this is what we do. There are some attacks. I'm just going to go through this more quickly, but for example, living off the land attack, which is when companies or kind of malicious actors, they might use a legitimate process, like a benign Windows process, but they'll hide something in that. So they might like work off of that benign process to carry out attacks. There's also lateral movement, which is, let's say they first compromise a account, and then they use that account to then compromise another account. So let's say they got access to my machine, and then they use that to get access to my manager's account, for example. So that's lateral movement. As well as some other problems like data exfiltration we want to prevent, where maybe some user, they got either they just want to exfiltrate the data themselves, or they were compromised and they tried to ship out the data to somewhere it's not supposed to be. As well as domain generation algorithms, which is kind of like an obfuscation, causing confusion while malware contacts their command and control center. So they're going to use very different domains to try to evade attack. So some of this is part of what my team owns. We also do some other things in the GenAI sphere, but I'll touch upon that maybe more briefly because this talk is not about GenAI. So I wanted to talk about more like the security aspects that we work on, just, because I feel it's talked about a bit less. Businesses and individuals can suffer big losses if attacks are not detected. So that's why our team builds solutions like this with machine learning. So one quick example is, let's say this is people who have their data, they're using Elastic as a data store, and they're using it to store like logs of various, like, let's say their company's IT assets. So they might be logging like the behaviors, login, logouts on Okta, for example. They might be storing that in Elastic. If they have like Kubernetes managed clusters, or they have a bunch of containers or whatnot, that's like, serving their microservices, then they could be putting those logs into Elastic because people really like to do that. So we'll run the models that will be using that as the source data. And this is all run on the user side. So we, as the centralized team, do not get to see our customers' data, but rather we ship out the models and the models will run on their environment. So let's say that out of these logs, like we saw that this user has some anomaly in their logins on Okta, which is a service that helps log you into various corporate accounts. It might indicate a cyber attack. So then we'll use models to detect and alert on this. So these are some of the things that we have. This is just like a simple example. There's a bit more. So let's say there's a high count of logon events. That could be, I think in the description here, it says that it could be due to password spraying, user enumeration, or brute force activity. So these could all be malicious, and we want to help our customers catch that if they have their data stored in Elastic. So for example, like the high count logon fails, it might look for an unusually high spike in authentication failure events. And again, this is used to try to catch preventatively any sorts of cyber attacks that are using these techniques. So that is one side of the products that we create. And the other one is using Python to train machine learning models to classify malware. So this is another one of our projects, which is, for example, we'll take malware features. Like malware, they might come in like binaries, but we'll know some information about them. Like we know with the labels if they're malware or benignware. We might have some information about them, like the file header in the malware or the code information, as well as ingoing, outgoing packets, etc., that we observed from this process or this binary. And we'll conduct machine learning model training and evaluation so in the end, it'll train a model that, let's say you give it a new incoming kind of binary or process, and it knows the information about it. It can detect if this is a malware or not, or it'll say, oh, this is a high probability of being malware, or this is probably benign. So that is one of the things that we do as well. So some of the things we use here are XGBoost for machine learning models, ELAN, which is a Python connector to Elastic, and we use Jupyter Notebook, and we use Airflow and the kind of Python connectors to that. So it's a lot of things I'm going through right now, but Just to summarize, Python has been fundamental in my career so far in solving a bunch of problems or just challenges and just creating things in general. In game development, I've been able to use it to shape player interaction in the game, create animations, bring the game to life, as well as game mechanics. And in telecom, I was able to use it to work on the mobile apps and website, and other teams were using it to, for example, do fleet optimization. And in FinTech, we used it for financial forecasting, fraud detection, and so on. And in security, to detect malware, conduct anomaly detections, and so on. So I did not expect to be in any of these fields, but Python definitely was able to help me land here. Okay. Yeah, so the journey is not done yet. I'm still working in the sphere. Right now, some things I had tinkered with in the past were things like image generation or language models and RAG. Like I do some other talks on this topic, but I'm going to, they're mostly in the data focused conferences. So I'm going to be talking at one called Data Day Texas about RAG as well as re-ranking models. So, some of those more detailed information I'll be sharing in other talks. I also have been working with interactive web apps in the past as well, using Python. So to me, I would say it's enabled me to gather domain knowledge in different fields, lots of exploration and learning, as well as just being curious and growth, right? So from going from a hobby self-learned developer to having credits on 5 games and counting, as well as a career in machine learning and a writing career, I think I just really wanted to share all of this, even though it has been a bit of a winding or non-linear road. So what are you using Python? What brought you to this conference? If there's anything you're interested in building, hopefully you can apply something that you've learned from PyLadiesCon. So yeah, thank you. This is just some information about the book that I had, and you can actually request it at your local library and whatnot. So right now I'll leave it to Q&A. I think we have 5 minutes or something. Yeah, I think yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to leave it in Discord. And then I think Marietta would read out the questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. That's very inspiring, and I'm really impressed with your career, from starting with the self-learning Python, and then you actually made video game. I think that's just something I'm dreaming about since I was small. I wish I know how to make video games. So it's really inspiring, and I love hearing how you were able to just learn something, you learn how to make game and you were able to transfer it into all these different fields. That's quite cool. I don't think we see any questions, but I'm wondering how, and I'm not sure if we have time. Are you able to use ML AI with your video game that you're building, or is that a secret?
I guess there's been some things it just hasn't been very I guess effective, or I haven't found a really useful way to use it. There are some companies who try to use a more let's say they might use machine learning to kind of predict or do recommendations in the let's say the launcher. So one example is those huge companies that they have, let's say, a marketplace in their games. So they might use machine learning to recommend different, purchasable items and stuff like that. So you could have machine learning in that. You could use for large multiplayer games, they actually have like kind of cheating detection machine learning or like fraud detection machine learning, because people might buy things and use that to cheat, or they might buy things with like kind of like laundered money and so on. So actually huge companies have that, but because I'm a solo dev, like there hasn't been something specific I've been able to use it very effectively on. But yeah, I think it's possible there will be something, but it's just been a funny thing. Like I haven't combined these two domains.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, thank you for answering that. We did have one question. I'm going to read it out. What was one thing you did for a game that made a more data science algorithm make a lot more sense when you were learning about it? And were there algorithms you learned about later on that you wish you knew for a game problem you faced?
Ooh, I don't have a specific example I have in mind for this, but I would say that actually they're pretty mutually beneficial. Because I think in games, like one thing I really care about, or like I might have to care about, is for example the performance or just like the immediate end user experience. Because if it's not really loading really fast, or if like some animations are broken because the user is skipping across it really quickly, some of those things I have to deal with. And then after solving them, it makes me think more about the optimization aspect as well in my day job. So my machine learning role. So I feel like I've come to care or be able to write more kind of like useful or like more optimized code because of that. And I think another thing it makes me think about is because I'm usually the main programmer in the games, and actually as we've had more games, I've hired some contractors as well to collaborate, but mostly I'm the main lead programmer. So then I have to I'm like really responsible for all these aspects of the code. So then let's say I want to write more reusable code across different games. So this forces me to think about how to make the code more modular or reusable, even though some parts of it are still really messy. But the parts that make sense, that really matter, I try to make it really easy to reuse. And I think that's really helped me and my machine learning as well.
Thank you so much. I think we do have a few more questions that I saw on Discord, but I think we are out of time because the next session is starting. So I believe Susan, if you can join Discord and answer the questions there.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for this very inspiring talk. I really enjoy it. So thank you, Susan. Bye,
Yep.
everybody. Let's
Thanks again for
continue with
having me.
Thank you. Let's continue with the next session with at PyLadiesCon. Bye.